Hey, my name's Jacob Suko, and this is Email Empire, my personal project to take years of experience using email to grow everything from SaaS, e-commerce, coaching, and more, and distill it into something actionable that you can use to grow your online business. Now, this whole video thing is pretty new for me and you, and the intro is going to make sense in a second for everybody listening. So I want to give you an idea of what the hell's actually going on. This year, I'm incorporating the video from every podcast recording we've done so far, so you can watch just as easily as you can listen. And you just might see these snippets from these shows pop up on other places too. But it also means that you're going to get even more great content on this YouTube channel too. So in exchange for all the tutorials, breakdowns, and templates that are coming your way, I've only got one ask. If you get anything out of this video, hit the subscribe button so even more people can find their way to Email Empire. And if you're listening, head to youtube.com/@emailempire and hammer that subscribe button too. All right, let's dive in. So my guest today is Stephen Pratley. Stephen is an OG direct marketer who's helped pioneer the email and digital programs for some of the UK's biggest subscription e-com businesses. And now he's teaching other online entrepreneurs how to apply everything he's learned over his career with copy and conversions. This was an episode packed with more gold nuggets than anything I would have expected going into the conversation. So I want to give you a heads up. You're going to want to pull out a notebook before you hop in. But outside of that, I don't want to keep you from this any longer. So let's get into the episode. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining today. I'm super excited because I've got somebody on the other end of the line here that I can't wait to introduce you to. My friend Stephen Pratley has over 20 years of experience promoting education, training businesses, bringing Fortune 500 strategies into independent business owners. Think trainers, teachers, coaches, e-commerce, anything that you can think of. And it's all based on a hardcore background in direct and digital marketing. He's a founding member of the DMA Email Marketing Council, and he's a teacher at the Institute of Digital and Direct Marketing in the UK too. So I could keep going on and on for about 5 more minutes on accomplishments for you, Stephen, but I think it'd be a hell of a lot more fun just to kick things off. So first and foremost, thank you so much for being here, and say hi to everybody.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm super excited. I know we had a few bounces on the way to getting here, but it's going to be worthwhile.
Yeah, 100%, right? Anything that can survive 2 or 3 different tech mix-ups and a microphone failure at the beginning of this call, there's got to be something damn good on the other side that we're trying to get held back here. So everybody hang on tight. But seriously, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to dive in, mostly because I really love the mix of your background. It's not too often that I get a chance to meet folks who've literally dabbled in just about every industry that you can think of that folks try and niche in to some extent, right? And it's something that specifically taught me a ton, is going in and winning and breaking things in multiple different kinds of industries. And so what I'd love to kick everything off with today is just to learn, like, how do you get started? How do you get where you are today? What's your story look like?
Okay. So I stumbled into direct response. I did a business course at university, and everyone wanted to be in advertising in those days. And I was lucky that the place I went at Kingston Business School, there was a couple of guys there who actually were really old school direct marketers, like direct mail guys, and who wanted to teach more about that as a discipline. And we had a kind of brief introduction to it as part of that course. And also some guys who they were quite heavy on stats and things like that as part of the course. If you've ever run any kind of direct mail campaigns, things like testing and which one's winning and segmentation, all that stuff. So we had this kind of really solid grounding and stuff. And I really enjoyed it because I wouldn't really class myself as being like either a kind of left brain or right brain person. Like my mum's an English teacher, so I grew up having force-fed the value of books and reading. My dad worked in the computer industry, so we had computers kicking around the place from when I was quite young. And those two things came together. And when I discovered direct response, it's like you've got the creativity end of copywriting and designing mail packs and all the strategic end. And then there's actually making it happen, which is a lot of mucking about with data and looking at the results when they come back in. And merging those two things together was really cool, I thought. Being able to do both of those things. And I don't think there's a ton of people who have both of those skills. Most people tend to sit at one end or the other. Now, I'm not an excellent copywriter, and I'm not a coder by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm good enough at both of those to be able to put basic campaigns together completely on my own, really. So when I left university, I did a job with a publisher, and I was running some of their direct mail programs for an English language teaching publisher, and ended up doing my first email campaign. I'm going to give away my age here, but it's like the back end of the 90s, like before MailChimp or anything like that existed. And they were selling this product. It was a kind of multimedia CD-ROM product. And I was thinking, this is not going to get sold to schools like they thought it was. And I convinced them to put a little product registration card in the product. So it shows how long ago it was. He was still selling software on discs. And when the first response came back in, I can literally remember it to this day. The card came back in, and it was from a sales rep from IBM in Sao Paulo in Brazil. And I looked at this and I thought, there are people out there like business guys trying to improve their English. They're not at a school. They're not at private language school. And this is not the right product for them. So I scraped together, like we got about 20 of these things in. And I pulled together a little email pack and an order form for a proper business language package that they did. And we sent it out to 24, 25 people, and got 10 orders for a £200 package. So I'm like, wow, that's $2,000, which was pretty much my salary for the month. So I'd hit a button and paid for myself. And I just kept doing that. And I managed to automate the thing as well. And I thought, this is absolutely crazy that most of their stuff gets sold by sales reps going around knocking on the door. And here I am selling stuff to people in Brazil off the end of an email campaign. And it just snowballed from there, really. So I did that. I wanted to get into just direct response. The bit that really excited me was seeing the numbers coming back in, the sales. So I went off and worked kind of agency side and got a really broad view of lots of different industries in there. So I did some e-commerce stuff. I did a ton of work with a company called Read Business Publishing, which is a big B2B publisher over here, who taught me absolutely masses about. They sell very expensive magazine subscriptions, and seeing not just a direct mail campaign go out, but the effort they would put into gaining a subscriber and keeping hold of them as well, and all the tricks that they did and all the tests that they ran to make sure those campaigns worked well. That's what gave me the kind of lift off to getting good at this stuff, because we were doing lots and lots of it all day long, loads of tests. I got to see the tests that were coming in. I got to see the results that came back in again. And that was the kind of first bit when, okay, there's a point in your career, I think, where you need to put a ton of reps in on a particular skill. And I think that's where it started for me. And then from there into email, really when email took off, I was working for an agency on some brand project I didn't really enjoy. I used to run the Action Man website was my job, which was funny about the amount of money I got paid for it, but I didn't really enjoy it. And I quit, and I went and pitched the guys who had sold us the email marketing service that we use for our clients. And I said, I love the technology you've got, but you do not talk to marketers. You're talking technology. And I went in as a consultant there and just used all the things that I'd learned from direct mail and sold those processes into people using email, who are mostly still in those days quite IT orientated rather than marketers. And again, got to run a ton of campaigns in email quite early on. Lots of e-commerce stores. Again, we worked for Read and a bunch of other magazine guys. So that's how I transitioned from that into email. And I've just carried on doing the same thing since, really. So pick out of that what you will.
There's way too much to pick out.
Yeah.
First and foremost, right, for an email diehard like me, it's always fun to hear somebody talk about sending email from before the century term. Yeah, because everyone that I've talked to, though, that's been in that scenario has a very different perspective of the way that things endure over time. And I always love to hear that, because everybody likes to talk about the death of this platform, the death of this, the death of whatever the hell else it is. And none of them die. They just
I think probably fax marketing is the one thing that I've seen that really has just fallen off a cliff. And
Dan Kennedy would have a bone to pick with you on that one. That's for damn sure. But outside of that,
yeah, I'm sure there's somebody out there still running faxes to random offices and printing cash off of it. But yeah, these things they just get squeezed down a little bit. Email is that, I'll admit email is not, it's a tougher game now than it used to be. And everything just gets squeezed by new things coming in. So social come in, that squeezes down and it has its space. Broadcast TV has been squeezed down. It's lost time to things like YouTube, but they find their space and people start trying to use them for everything. And I think emails has a route that won't ever go away.
Yeah.
It might get pushed more by other channels, but it's been around long enough to prove its worth. It's pretty entrenched in our lives, particularly once you start working. So
3.8 billion people and 80% of them check it.
yeah, I mean, everyone says, oh, this new generation doesn't use email. When they get a job, they'll start using email. It's happened with the millennials. It'll happen with Gen Z. It'll happen with the next one after that. There's certain things in life you need an email address for. And once you've got an email inbox, then, you're going to start getting some marketing as well.
Yeah, 100%. The biggest thing for me watching all of this in terms of the question of doesn't stick around is just, what do you use to log into your phone? The number one pervasive device that we have inside of our hands is attached to you at the hip. The thing that you use to access it, it's an email address, right?
Yeah,
but regardless, the bigger point that sits behind that, right, is that these things change in terms of execution and tactics and what the implementation looks like, but it's the strategies that stay the same. And one of the reasons I was super excited to have a conversation with you is that one of the things that seems to have lost a little bit of fanfare or popularity potentially, or has grown a little bit slower, is what it looks like to apply direct response principles in a business. And specifically, I think that's really interesting because we have more access to advertising in any format than we've ever had. It is now 150 times plus easier to be able to get in front of whatever audience it is that you would choose to do. And with that, we've also seen the popularity and rise of a focus on brand-based marketing. And I think it's really silly to be able to talk about the two as two separate entities, right?
Yeah.
But just different ways that you go about communicating that. And I'd love to get your take on what the mix, the delineation between those two terms are, because I hear so many people caught between them.
Yeah, I think so. What I've seen happen is the barriers in the early days were technology. Right? It was hard to put together a big direct mail campaign, machines and stuff to do that, but high capital stuff. And it was the same with email. It was difficult to do it at scale. Was hard. We crashed websites. When we solved that problem and managed to pump out big volumes of email, we would crash websites on the other end. If you're in the UK, there's a fashion business called ASOS, which used to be known as Seen on Screen. We crashed their servers the first email campaign we ran because they just couldn't cope with the response. Right. So those things were really hard. So there's always I think people that have been in for a while have a bit more technological bias because they had to get past those things. Now that the stuff's easy, the fact you can get a MailChimp account, most of the big email tools will give you like 1,000 subscribers for nothing. Means that on a personal level, you can absolutely get into the game with nothing. And there are people who I know are doing quite well online that have never bought so much as their own domain name. They have an email tool with some kind of landing page function in it to gather emails. They get traffic via a social platform, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever it might be. And they push traffic to a SaaS-based platform, I don't know, Gumroad or Kajabi or whatever it might be, to sell their product, or Shopify if it's physical. So but as the technological barrier goes down, more people come in. So I think the challenge now is overcoming the noise and being heard in amongst a million other people out there. And that gets easier every once in a while. All of a sudden, TikTok comes out and there's another ton of media being consumed and another new load of opportunities. But I wonder how far we're getting in terms of just how much screen time people are ever going to get to. And it's probably going to go up a bit, but that's the general screen time limits are quite low. So the audiences were low. And I think there was a lot of things that we did in the early days that probably just failed because there weren't enough people around.
Sure.
There weren't enough people online all the time, particularly in the days when you paid for dial-up. Those were literally paying for your internet access per minute. So that was a challenge. but it is harder getting through the noise. Like one of the first email campaigns we ever did, I told you earlier about, we sent this campaign for the language teaching course that had a nearly 50% conversion rate, like actual sales, never mind 50% opens, which would be good these days. 50% clicks would be heard of, like 50% purchases is, you would think there was something wrong if that happened. And this later on, one of the first agency ones I did was for a skincare business called Martin Brown. It was the same thing. The first campaign we did, nearly half the people we sent it to bought because they were sent to people who had left their business cards in the shop who had never had emails from them. And we sent them a sale. It was people who, so there's a customer list, a great offer, and they bought in droves, but just getting the cut through on that now is hard. So I think the levels of creativity that you need and the level of customer understanding that you need, that's the bit that's gone up. And then, like I say, because all the barriers have come down in terms of who can get into it, that's really led the flood of like individual influencers.
Mhm.
So it's now a lot easier. Just human nature makes it a lot easier for a face to become a brand. So when we talk about branding now, you can look at this in big business, like Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple. He had twice as many followers on Twitter as Apple does. Okay. So that's like the biggest brand in the world. And the guy who I have to struggle to remember his name, the guy who was known as Tim Apple by Trump, he's got twice as many followers because people follow people. So there's been an amazing wave of individuals doing things. And you'll see CEOs of businesses will be much more likely to put their own face out there rather than just issuing press releases from the brand. And that goes right the way down to individuals and little Twitter accounts with 1,000 followers who have still got something interesting to say. And so, because all the tools are there and it's very easy to get started, a lot of people will get started. And then I think what's also happened is that a kind of human nature has taken over, that they're much more interested in listening to an individual than they are listening to a brand spouting at them in the way that would have happened in the heyday of television, for example. So I think that's really what shifted. Now, within that, I think that what's happened is that people have become very focused on social media, which is a very kind of top of funnel activity. And things like visible measures of success, like followers and likes and retweets and reshares, have become their metric. And we see those and think that's what represents success. But the people who are really nailing it are the people who are operating what I call like below the waterline. It's all the stuff that you don't see. And the bits that happen, you can really spot a great direct marketer after the sale, I think. So you can make a sale of a $10 gumroad product. Some people will go broke doing that, even though they have tens of thousands of followers. And some people who may only have a handful of followers will do fantastically well because that first sale, it's not really a sale at all. It's like an opt-in, but it has this filter for these people have money and are prepared to spend it. And that I think is where, through a lack of visibility, a lot of people will go, oh, that person's successful because they've got like 100,000 followers and they did a product launch and made 25 grand in a day. But that's all there is to the business. And the people who are really successful, actually, you don't really see, and it's quite hard to see under the line of who's doing well and who isn't. So I think that's really what's changed. And I think that's where people who understand about what goes on after a sale do much better and much quietly just keep selling more products to the same customers that solve the same problem in more depth or that solve the next problem after that. That's how they do particularly well.
Yeah. There's 12 things that you hit on that I'd love to dive into, but the big one that sticks out that I think.
Sorry, I think and talk too fast.
No, it's okay. I do the exact same thing. I get stuck into rambles, which is why the podcast is great because it forces me to shut up and listen. And to listen to really amazing things too, because you mentioned something when you were talking about ASOS, when you were talking about the skincare brand. Also, by the way, ASOS now is like one of the biggest, essentially, direct marketing businesses that exist in the face of the world. The
Yeah.
amount of volume that they do through email marketing alone inside of their traffic is absolutely unreal.
Yeah. It's insane what they do over.
And it goes to the point that you made initially, and that's how far you can get with a great offer and a list of customers. And most people would think that they come in that order, that you create a great offer and then you find a list of customers for that offer. When quite frankly, you mentioned just towards the end is that you can actually do it in the reverse order. And it's a hell of a lot easier to create a better
Yeah.
offer in the opposite order, which in a lot of scenarios is creating something it's relatively low ticket, it's very accessible. It solves a small problem that you know that your audience is going to have. But what
Yeah.
it does is it creates a much deeper connection to them on the front end. And we're dancing around the topic of what it looks like to essentially run back end offers and funnels and
Yeah.
things like that might be foreign to a number of folks listening. And so maybe we can dive into that a little bit. So tell me a little bit more about what it looks like in terms of the more ideal setup for a funnel, right? Where you don't need 100,000 followers, where that
Yeah.
1,000 email subs can generate you one, two, three, four, $500,000 a year. What does
Yeah.
that structure look like in practice?
Yeah. So I think that there's definitely a kind of timeline that any customer goes along from knowing nothing about you to having the confidence to spend a quite significant chunk of cash with you. Okay. And I think there's a couple of ways that happens. So we were talking before the call about, say, HubSpot. Right? So HubSpot is a big sales CRM business. It's expensive. You don't get to free trial it before the product comes in. And when they get you to sign the contract, you're in for small numbers of thousands minimum a year, right? HubSpot spends a ton of time. They have one of the biggest content creation teams in the world. They create blog posts that get picked up by SEO. They have all kinds of tools. They do loads and loads of things to help you out, build trust, talk about the problems you're trying to solve. And then eventually you spend a large amount of money with them in one go. The other way of doing it, so that's brand building, right? Although there's a lot of direct response goes on, like they're trying to get your email, they're trying to nurture you along that curve. They're doing little nudges, but there's a massive amount of free content that goes out along the way. So that's more of a kind of brand build play until the purchase. The other end of it is you sell something that's very small. You do a little bit of trust because they've got to like enough to make sure they don't think you're a scammer and that you're going to run away with their credit card details, right? You have to get past that barrier. But you do something that's quite small that somebody will buy in an impulse purchase. $30, $50, it depends what market you're dealing with. If it's dealing with wealthy people, that number can be a bit big. But it's an impulse purchase, but it specifically hits the problem that you know that they have, and you solve that. And then after that, you start to build up your revenues afterwards. So you part of the product itself massively over deliver with the product. And the product does a lot of that brand building stuff that is being given away for free by other, but to a smaller market because you're only talking to the people who have actually bought relatively early on. Now, those people, there's a whole bunch of strategies around how you go from selling somebody a $9 ebook to getting them onto a $50,000 a year mastermind. And there's lots of steps within that, but essentially it's going deeper into the same problem, giving them more access to you and a more tailored solution to what they want. So if I'm working with somebody as a one-to-one consult, it costs a lot more than if they just buy a course of mine or go into a group coaching thing where I can help lots of people at once. So there's a kind of economics. And the other thing is going, well, okay, I've hit a problem here. What's my next problem? And solving that. I was trying to remember what the example was that we had before. So I worked with the rapid learning teaching product that we did. We ran webinar funnels for them, did about 3 million in sales over a couple of years. And one of the things that we offered was a short productivity class because we were offering that at the start because we knew that was going to take away the barrier to them spending the time to learn the product. So in all the webinars, we'd said, what have you tried before and where have you failed? Great research question to ask. Because if somebody's spending money, they've probably tried all the free routes. And they all said, I can't find the time to actually learn these skills. Like you've got to get better at memory. You've got to practice some stuff, but learn some stuff. You've got to practice it. And we knew that our customers were mostly students who had like the thought of exams coming down the road and they were worried about it. So we gave them this kind of productivity course that would save them half an hour to an hour a day, which gave them the time and energy to practice what we got. So that's like a little problem and then selling the next. The classic one in like weight loss is you lose a bunch of weight. Now you need a new wardrobe. So they'll do like style fits and things for your new shapes. That's a classic one. Is you achieve the goal and sometimes the goal itself will create the next problem that you have to deal with, or you'll just arrive at that goal. So there's lots of ways of doing that. And you can take somebody along that journey in a series of paid products rather than necessarily giving it all away to lots of people and then closing in on the ones who are prepared to make that big sale at the end. So they both work. But I think if you're a smaller business, then having a little bit of cash flow coming in and proving the issue that you've got, and also somebody spending money on something, well, they'll put more effort in and they'll be more bound to you and more likely to respond to you and give you honest answers to the challenges they're having. They're more likely to get on calls with somebody who they've bought for than they will with a complete stranger. I think that's a better route to go than mountains of free content and then a drop hoping to make the big payday at the end. Because if it doesn't come off and you haven't got the offer right, it's hard to swallow that as a smaller business.
Yeah, hugely. Because you're banking on either one of two things you have access to, right? So if you look at HubSpot, what resources do they have access to? Is it going to be capital intensive that they have money to burn essentially to be able to build this up? Yes. Or do you have time as a resource to be able to burn in order to try and build the trust, develop the cash to outpace it? And the more time that you have to be able to give, the faster you can outpace it, quite frankly. Because if we're looking at somebody needs to trust you in order to buy from you, if we're talking about a service-based business, a coaching-based business, a consulting-based business, very specifically anything B2B, you're solely selling on trust, right? Yes, there's emotions that get people in, but that's your barrier to overcome.
Yeah.
In e-commerce and more transactional things, it's a little bit different. You can get away with a little bit more on the impulse side of the house, right?
Yeah.
But we're talking in a lot of situations to folks who sell services or mid-ticket courses and things along those lines. And you can give somebody free content for a year and a half and convince them to buy your $150 course. And hopefully you've amassed enough people to make the economics of that work out for you to get paid enough to survive, which quite frankly, as time goes on and inflation goes up, is an ever increasing number.
Yeah.
Or you can accelerate the time that someone gets to purchase your first product, which is an introductory that tells you a hell of a lot about their behavior and their intent. And you can use that data to be able to create solutions that serve that person in a much more intense, in-depth, time-efficient way to be able to create something that's lasting a hell of a lot faster. And so the gap in between those two things is that the trust is either built solely over time with content that's free, or the trust is built via results. And in both scenarios, they're taking action based on something that you've given them that proves, oh shit, Steven knows what he's talking about. This stuff works, right? In any kind of info marketing business. And so if you're banking on them to take action on free material as well, you're going to be waiting so much longer. Whereas if there's something that they purchased, there's a much higher motivation and intent to be able to done that on the front end, and you simply get results for your audience quicker. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because I know one of the biggest objections that I have to overcome with folks that I work with, whether it be in the community and coaching, or even quite frankly, clients, for creating an introductory offer like that is I'm worried about scaring more of them away. I'm worried that's going to pull on my back end because it's going to push people off the list or cause them to unsubscribe, whatever else that may be. I'd love to get your take on that, because I've got all of my answers to refute that, but it's always interesting to hear what your experience has pulled in on that side too.
Yeah. I think that's really what you've just talked about, about if I sell too much, then it's going to ruin the list. I think that's so misguided, because what will actually happen is that the longer you take before you sell, the more recoil you're going to get when you do it. You will have people on there who will have just been straight up trained to think that you're a free media outlet of some kind. You will also get people who would have bought, but who you haven't brought a solution to, and they've just drifted off because someone else has provided it. So I think it depends a little bit on the market. I look at it a bit like there's kind of two models of when people are selling online. There's a couple of models. One is you have something that's available all the time and people buy into that and they upsell. And the other way is the kind of launches thing where it might be the same product, but you only open up entry for it 3 or 4 times a year. Now, I think that latter one should only really be used for kind of new opportunities. Because if somebody has a problem, then you saying, I'm not going to solve it for you for 3 months, it's not great. If it's something that's new and I don't know, you've just invented webinars or you've just invented the next version of VSL, so people weren't being held back from it before, I think that's fine. You open it up, it's a new opportunity, you get lots of excitement around it. That's great. But I think if you've got somebody who has got a problem that they're stressing about, you need to be able to give them something to get them started as quickly as possible, because that's what makes lists die. Email lists churn at a good 20% a year at least. So people will just drop off because they'll just find an alternative. So I think you've always got to have that offer there. And in the HubSpot example, that product is there available for you to buy at any point along that cycle. If you desperately need a sales CRM because you've just started a business and hired 5 sales guys, then, they're there for you. They're not holding off on you. It's just that for most people, it takes an awful lot of time to build up that trust. A lot of people aren't that wild about people selling sales tools because they tend to be sold by quite pushy salesmen. Salesforce, being a good example, have a fairly bad reputation for being quite pushy, and they have to overcome all that stuff that's come before them. So sometimes it will take a long time, but it's there and available. I think if you've got a way of helping somebody with their problem, then a small product that at least gets them set off in the right direction is a great way to start. And then if they need more than that, then having things in the back end or offering one-to-one type services is the next route along from that. So I think that's one way of looking at it, is what kind of problem are you solving? Is it a painful problem they need solving right now? In which case you can pull somebody in at any time, because if they feel a sense of urgency, like not a sense of urgency that's created by you saying a cart's closing tomorrow, but a sense of urgency because their life's going downhill and they can see it and it's been built, then you should be providing something to them straight away if you have the expertise to do that. So I think that's one way looking at it is it a painful problem they have right now, or is this a new opportunity that you want to build some excitement around? And that's a slightly different way of looking at it.
Yeah. And quite frankly, unless you've got some capital to invest and a hell of a lot of time to wait on for cash flow, I personally don't recommend it.
Yeah.
It
also, it gives you great research. It can give you really good research. Once you've bought a product from somebody, I think you're much more likely to maybe even get on the phone with them or have slightly more honest conversations with them than you would beforehand. It's really hard to get somebody on a telephone for a discussion these days. Nobody wants to do it because they know they're going to get sold to. So even when you tell people, I just want a conversation because I'm researching a new product, they all think it's just a failed sales pitch. So it's really tough. But once you've sold something to somebody, even tiny little ebook stuff, I've sold things for $1 and then emailed them a couple of days later and said, was that helpful? What gaps are there still? What's still missing from you getting to your goal? And got great responses out of that. So a buyer's list is super, super responsive. Personally, I'm a massive fan of what I call dollar deals. So you just, you sell something that's a very high quality lead magnet, but you charge for it just $1. And all that does is it wipes out all the people who don't even own a credit card or can't pay you or who just have a mindset of never paying for information. It just clears the decks of all of those people and hones in on the people who have actually wants to solve that problem. Because I see things like, I don't know, copywriting. I must have a dozen copywriting courses. But if I see something from somebody who looks like they know what they're talking about and it's $1, it would be stupid not to try it. And it's just interesting to see what they've got, if they've got a different perspective on it. So in you go. And then once I've done that, you ratchet up in the trust you have for that person. So I'm a big fan of really easy to get started.
Yeah.
I think it comes from, I talked about this big B2B publisher, and one of the kind of staples of magazine publishing is the £1 or $1 trial. So you get 3 issues for £1 and then you roll on to a 12-month subscription, usually quite heavily discounted and so on. And we ran so many of those and we tested so many alternatives to it and couldn't beat it. I'm like, this is a really good way to go. You give them a little piece and they get a taste of the quality of it and then they stick with it because people come in for the marketing, but they stick because of the product. But your product has to be good for people to stick around and want to buy more of it. But it's not really the marketing that's making the second sell. It's the quality of the product itself. So the product almost becomes the marketing for the next thing just by being good. And I think that kind of attitude of that magazine publishers, and you see it with some of the biggest newsletter companies in the world. People always talk about Agora, who are a big financial tips publisher. That's how they do stuff. You quite often get, they'll sell you a kind of premium as the basis of the first thing. And then you get your sort of rolling subscription to their tip sheet. So you give them something that's super high value, like overloaded relative to the price. And then because that's good quality, people stick around later on and have no qualms around that. And I think maybe I just saw so many successful campaigns on that basis and saw how hard it was to beat that I'm like, just carry on with that same route that you've seen as work. You don't see many publishing businesses putting tons of branding effort in to get you to buy. They just stick a flyer in another magazine. So they know you're a magazine buyer, which is important. And then they get you to buy that thing. And then you buy because of the quality of the product. So if you're selling information products, it's super relevant.
Yeah. Well, and it's also one of the reasons why you have to explain Agora every time you mention the damn name, because the only people who know about it are marketers or copywriters or anyone in the direct response world, or people who are heavily vested in finance because they do such a good job with the way that they target their audience.
Yeah.
And it's important.
So there are more mainstream publishers that do the same thing. It's the same trials are done by, I saw one of these for, I think it was the Times Online that my mom was buying, and the Telegraph Online, same thing. It's like you get a month's access to the app for next to nothing, and then you're onto a rolling subscription. So any kind of information product, what keeps you going back is always the quality of the product, but you have to get someone in. There's 2 ways you can do that. This comes from a guy called BJ Fogg, who's a Stanford professor. He actually does a lot in healthcare, getting people to do behavior change. But where he's found it's much more effective to make the entry point easier than it is to motivate people to take action. Because you can motivate somebody to take action, it doesn't last. But if you make it easy, you'll get just as many people in, but they're much more likely to stick. So there's a kind of habit forming thing of marketing that comes into play. And I think whatever you can do to go, what's the smallest effective thing I can do for somebody at the start of their journey? And that's usually a fantastic first product. It's usually if you took something that's a really, really high quality lead magnet and just put a tiny price on that, that's normally quite a good strategy.
Yeah. It's That's super interesting. So there's one thing that you mentioned that I think is a really great metaphor for why it is counterproductive to hold off a sale for so long. So you mentioned with sales folks and getting people on call, we're super hesitant. If something is free, either you're the product or you're going to be sold. There's no such thing as
Yeah.
a free lunch. We know
Yeah.
this. Literally, like lunch and learns in doctors' offices are a direct
Yeah.
one-to-one example of that, right?
Yeah.
And if you know that, then there's always going to be this subconscious hesitation on being sold at some point in time. And the longer that you draw that process out is wondering two things. One, how big is this going to be when you drop it on? But
Yeah.
secondarily, so too, is well, how the hell do I actually take action on any of this stuff? Because, like you mentioned with the BJ Fogg reference, right? Is I've seen that graph and it's a phenomenal study to take a look at
Yeah.
because the threshold for motivation in comparison to, or for motivation alone, rather, in comparison to a lowered barrier of entry is something like 20 or 30x when you
Yeah.
look at what that,
It's
it's
huge and it's very
unreal.
hard to do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you're doing a massive disservice if you come in and you're banking on this idea of my free content is going to actually leave people wondering, this is good. I wonder what the paid stuff looks like, and relying on them to be able to make that jump themselves. We're busy. We need help. Our screen time is astronomical, and you're consistently making decisions that you don't know what to do with on a day to day basis. And so, without guidance and help towards what the actual solution is, quite frankly, you're making a negative impact on the folks that stand on top of the list. And so, this is super interesting. And I want to make a point on this for folks who might be looking into it because we talked earlier on about the free plans that you get with a lot of these email marketing services. And the same thing goes
Yeah.
with any other service platform or selling platform where they offer you a small amount for free or to take a percentage or whatever else it may be. And they give you up to 1,000 people for free. That number seems to be consistent, right? Across MailChimp, or maybe it's 500 in whatever scenario. But the reason for that, quite frankly, I would say is that they're pretty damn confident if you can amass 500 people, you're going to be able to generate enough revenue to justify the cost for what that platform is. And it
Yeah.
brings up this point that I really want to dive into with you. And it's that you don't need a large list in order to see profit. And quite frankly, I know we've talked about this and I've seen it myself, but there's very small lists that are hyper efficient and just very effective at generating results for the folks that are on it that outmass lists 10x the size that just don't have as good of a structure for the folks that are on there. Why do you think that is? Where do you think that comes from?
I think there's a I think there's a few reasons. I think one of them is that if you the first step is how somebody's actually chosen the problem they're going to solve. Okay. And this is this is really hard, but I'm sure that you have people coming to you who have got expertise in a certain area. They want to create like an info product and they're already locked in their mind about what that thing's going to be.
Yes.
And it's because they have an investment of an entire career already in whatever that skill is and the kind of people that they're selling to. And quite often you're looking at this going, there are not enough people in this market, and or the people in this market are not the kind of people who are going to spend money on the thing that you've got. I think that the first one tends to be professionals moving into trying to do coaching. And it's, yeah, you used to do one-to-one consulting at £1,000 a day, but there's only 10 businesses in that market. I sold my first agency to a technology business who did everything to do with retail. Like we did the e-commerce sites. They did like the warehousing, the distribution, the tills and checkouts in the store, everything. They said there was something like 10 deals in the UK every year. That was it. 10 deals. Every single one of them was at least £1 million.
Mhm.
And some of them were really significant. The first one we worked on was like a 50 million plus software deal. So they're used to working in these areas at doing hands-on stuff, these like super niche, super high value businesses. And then they come out and try and touch some aspect of that. And the market just isn't there because the market's tiny. So that's quite tough. So actually, if you want to create an offer, if what you really want is an offer that's going to do like millions, that's going to sell potentially thousands of products a day, you have to start off in a market which can sustain that. And there aren't many markets which have got that huge volume. So what will tend to happen is people will build up an audience in one area. They'll start to fall flat a bit. They'll widen the net and they become generic, and they have a whole bunch of different segments in there that have been interested in different things that they've talked about over time. And no one segment will respond to any specific offer. So they have to just keep moving the pieces around all the time. Whereas the people that are successful, I think, are the ones who manage, and I've got to admit to being terrible at this, one of them managed to just bang the same drum for years. And I think anyone who's tried to create courses and ask themselves the question about where do I stop with this product will know exactly what I'm talking about. Because, and it's the same with email marketing, where you talk about something for a couple of weeks and then you're bored of the sound of your own voice and you move on. And yet some people are able to just keep hammering away at the same thing. On my bookshelf, I've got a copy of like the Miracle Morning or the 1 Minute Sales Manager, which are these tiny books. And these people have built multi-million empires out of this one idea they just kept going at. And I think that's where the success comes from. That becomes seen as an expert in a very small niche. It doesn't even need to be that small a niche, but in one tiny part of that marketplace, and a true expert. And you build around that. And you don't, because you're being very specific about that problem, you don't need vast lists in order to convert it. Because if you only talk about one thing, everybody that follows you is into that one thing. So is much more likely to convert into that first sale. And then if it's something that you can bring more depth to without having to change lanes too much, then you can build a huge business off that. And you can build it by either having a very high value per customer, because you can just go deeper and deeper into that problem with that customer. Or it's a problem that lots and lots of people have. So you solve it once and are able to move on very quickly because there's a never ending market to follow. Like the rapid learning thing, we would sell that to students. The student market pretty much replaces itself about every 4 or 5 years. So if you can keep an offer going for 4 years, all the people coming into it have never seen it before and it's brand new to them. So there are markets that replenish themselves. There are markets that are so big you're never going to get to the bottom of them. Weight loss. And wanting to make more money. Everybody would love to have more money. There's certain markets you can do that with. But I think the crux of it is you start off with something that's very specific that you can solve. And it doesn't have to be huge. If you look at bestseller lists, you will see how there's literally, this guy wrote a book about drink more water and write your goals down in the morning and made millions out of it. Like, it's a tiny little problem, but there are millions of people who suffer that issue, who get to the end of the day and don't feel like they've achieved anything. That's a massive problem. Loads of people feel that. So if you really want to make spectacular amounts of money out of selling things online, you always need to forget all the skills you've got. Go, what do people actually need? And then work out how to deliver that. And that might mean that you need to go into partnership with somebody who's got those skills, maybe be the back end guy, a bit like I've been. Or it can be a problem that's actually that you've solved in your own life and go, okay, I've done it. I can sell that to other people. So amongst all the marketing stuff that I've taught, I've always had this, like I quit drinking a few years ago.
Mm.
Like, there are lots of people who want to do that. And lots of people have approached me and gone, Steve, how did you do it? So I used to drink a lot, but I was mildly famous for it amongst my friends and being good at it as well. And then I just stopped overnight. And so there's things like that some people that you can do, that you can look around the market and go, actually, I know how to do that. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an addiction specialist. I managed to do that. And people have come to me and said, how did you do it? And I told them, and I know that a couple of other people managed it as well. So a lot of creating a really good offer can sometimes come from leaving all the baggage of what you think people want at the door, and definitely leave behind what you think people need. Go and look for what people want. Look at what they're spending money on. Go, is that something that that I have some credibility in and that I've achieved or I've helped somebody else achieve, and move in that way.
I think it's a beautiful metaphor for the way that everything's set up. And quite frankly, if you're someone who's working on creating a brand new offer or reshaping yours to where it's something that's much more successful, I would definitely replay that last 10 minutes about 14 times over. But there's one more thing that I want to dive into before we tie everything up here. It's all based on what you mentioned. So I love the portion that you mentioned about leaving your ego at the door and listening to your audience for what problems that they actually think they need help with, and not what you think they need
Oh,
help
yeah.
with. Because I've spent the better part of the past 2 years up until forming Email Empire solving problems that I thought that people needed solved. Offer creation, funnels, direct marketing, copywriting, all problems that I knew needed to be solved.
Yeah.
But not a one of them was the way that the average Joe who's trying to create a name for themselves inside of a business, a course, influencing brand, or whatever it may be, not the way they labeled it. And because I wasn't speaking their language and talking to the problems that they had issues with, at least in their own minds, there's a massive disconnect. There's something beautiful that happens when you're able to bridge the knowledge that you have with the problem that people think that they need solved. You can take them in whatever direction they need to go after that based on your expertise. That's phenomenal. You need to hit on one thing first. And quite frankly, my preferred way to do that, obviously, is to build an email list around a topic and let your audience tell you exactly how they identify the problem and then create that and sell it. That's the way that I like to do it. But what I'd love to hear is you were starting over. And let's take quite frankly, let's take quitting drinking example. This is an amazing way to be able to apply it.
Yeah.
If you were to start that from scratch, what would that look like for you? Just based on what your background is. And you were to, let's say, try and get a course or a workshop or an event, let's say, off the ground in, 3 months.
Okay. So like you need to start with something where you know you can solve a problem. Okay. And it usually means two things. It usually means that you've done it yourself and that you've managed to help somebody else with it. So the first step, and the first one isn't actually strictly necessary, right? Having done it for yourself, people will rag on business coaches who have never built a big business. Okay. But think about this. So my pastime is rowing. Okay. There's a German coach called Jürgen Grobler who coached the British team. He has been responsible for a gold medal at every single Olympics since 1972, and he retired just before Tokyo. He never rowed at the Olympics. Okay. So he's never done it, and yet he's been the most successful person in the world at getting other people to do it. And I know a coach who was from my own club who barely got past novice, tiny little guy, barely any muscles on it. And yet there's an honours board at the club full of people who he's taken to under 23s world championships as a coach. Okay. So sports is a bit different because there's obviously a physical aspect to it, but you have to be able to, it's much more important to be able to communicate. So using the same metaphor, Steve Redgrave, the most successful rower ever, never done a great job as a coach because he's natural. And I don't think he's such a natural that I don't think he can communicate what he does very well. So you need to be able to have done what you do for somebody else. So you need to just have some conversations, hang around places where people have that problem, which can be difficult in something like drinking, where people maybe don't want to discuss it, compared to making money or something where people are much more happy to go, yeah, that's something I want to do. But you have those conversations, you try and help. And I think you try and pick out what are the first things that people try, whether they're right or wrong. What are the first things that people try? So I would probably try a lead magnet or something like non-alcoholic drinks you can drink in front of your friends without them noticing, right? Because that's the first thing, is you're worried about confronting it with your friends. That's an issue. So if you could just avoid the problem a little bit, that's going to make life easier. And then you talk about the other things, about what happens when you actually give up and how you maintain it, how you tackle certain social scenarios, how the thing that you probably need to do, but which people don't do, which is how you actually tackle having friend conversations with your friends and family so you get support from them, and then move on through there. And I think you have to be in the market. I think it's really tough to sell stuff that you haven't experienced, or I do anyway, which is why I sell a lot of business education stuff, because I've been in that market. I went to business school. I've spent a lot of money on business education at a kind of strategic type level, lots and lots of little tactical things. I know exactly what it's like to buy that and why to buy it. And I can look at other things as well so if you need to have immersed yourself in the market to be able to have some conversations, help a few people out, like just as a friend. Or I'm not a massive fan of just pitching out free work, because I don't think that people value it too much when it's given away that way. But when somebody actually asks you for help and you give it, the first couple of times I think should be free, just while you're using them as a guinea. I think the ultimate version of that is you look at the drugs companies who will actually pay people to try their thing to prove it works. Okay? So you have that in mind, and then think of the payback they have when they've proven that it works and that it's safe and everything's great. Then you see why they're prepared to invest a little bit up front. So I think that's probably the first place is go, what challenges have I managed to overcome? And so many people will look at their work lives only and not realize that there's a mountain of other problems that they've overcome, that other people in their own personal lives, that other people have gone through as well. And this is where the really big niches come from. So I've just talked about drinking, people controlling drinking problems and health problems. There's probably eating disorders come into that as well, either just comfort eating or stress eating, whatever it might be. Relationship problems. If anybody's had rough patches in their marriage and managed to patch that back up again, how did they do that? Raising kids. The list goes on. I think if you start looking outside of your professional life, there's probably a mountain of things that you've solved that you could help other people with. And you're not in competition with die-hard marketers who have been this since they were like 50. So I think if I was going to just dump everything that I knew about direct response marketing and go into a completely different niche, it would be one of those. I'd go, okay, let's just leave work behind and go through a kind of timeline of the ups and downs of my life and work out what I've overcome that I can share with other people and help them and work through it that way. I think that's really how you do it. And try and remember what it was like at the start and what were the very early problems in there. Because I think if you can do that, then you can hit on, like you said, what they think they need to do before you sell them before you give them what they actually need to do. And just to carry on with this just a little bit longer, I think there's a real sense of professional pride that stops people from doing that. And I think that if you're really good at something, the things that people think they need to do, you can look at them and go, such an amateur approach. And be a bit like, but that's not what you should be doing. You should be doing this thing that you need to. Now, the example I always give is in things like weight loss and fitness trainers. People go to personal trainers because they want to lose some weight. They want to get down a jean size. They want to look good on their holiday, all that stuff, all that short-term stuff. But once they start doing it, they realize they've got more energy, their immune system's better. There's a whole bunch of other things come with it, that your mobility gets better. All these things that the PT know that in the long term is what it's all about. But because they don't want to see themselves as selling a drop a dress size challenge, they shy away from that. And so they never meet the market with the thing that they actually want. And they never get the chance to transition them onto the thing that they need. And I think one of the things that really successful marketers do is they have the ability to just I love that expression about just leaving your ego at the door. They have the ability to do that and to have a conversation with the person about what they want and to either for free or as a transaction, help them with that problem, and then segue them into the thing they actually need to do in the long term. I think it's an enormous challenge to get somebody who's considered a professional to suddenly start talking about 5-day weight loss challenges and things like that. And they really hate themselves doing it. But if you don't deal with that, if you don't get people on board with what they want to do, what they think they want to do, you're never going to get to the point where they're doing the things they really need to, like the long-term health gains, better mobility, better diet, all these other things that come out of a good program. And that works in every single market as well. So I think if you're looking at the people at the start of your market and thinking, oh, that's a bit amateur, that's probably what you actually need to be doing to make that first step.
Yeah, spot on. And it's great to hear that echoed, because at the end of the day, most folks want to run a business of some sort. Like, yes, cool. Financial objectives are usually a big portion of
Yeah.
that, right? Another is usually making an impact on the people that they want to be able to help, whatever scenario it is.
Yeah.
And understanding what the different stages to that awareness are is huge. Because if you want to help someone, let's say, quit drinking, right? The idea that you mentioned with alcoholic drinks, they're non-alcoholic drinks, excuse me, that you can have in front of your friends where they won't even notice. Would you say that continuing to put yourself in scenarios where other people are drinking casually is a great way to do that if you're trying to stop drinking? Probably not. But if that's key to getting them to actually resonate with what's the solution itself looks like, that's huge. You mentioned with health, right? Dropping a pant size or looking good for a holiday. You know, how many personal trainers talk about it that way in the way that they market themselves? They don't. They do it on expertise, right? And they do it on advertising themselves, which they think is a great way to get people to
Yeah.
idolize. But in reality, it actually makes them very unapproachable. If you look at the companies that do the exact same thing that they do best, they would probably scoff at all of them. Think Tybo in the 90s, right? Think
Yeah.
Beachbody and P90X and all the people who just stand there and all they do all day is just do knee kicks, right? Or whatever else that's getting advertised on there.
Yeah.
They'd shit all over it and say that doesn't work. But then you'd sit back and ask yourself, which one's doing tens of millions of dollars every single year? Quite frankly, multiples of that. And it's
Yeah.
not individual personal trainers. And the reason is that they're not meeting their market where they're at.
And some people go on, not everybody goes on from that because not everybody has the commitment to solving the problem. So my wife at the start of lockdown started doing yoga because she couldn't go to the gym anymore. And she has done that, bar a couple of days of illness, ever since the first day of lockdown 2 years back. She looks fantastic and she's getting all the other benefits. She's got a hip that was damaged in a car crash that doesn't give her problems anymore. She barely goes to the chiropractor anymore. She's done all those things. The first thing she bought was a 30-day challenge off of ClickBank, right? Now, most people think, oh, God, that's going to be absolutely awful. But it got us started. It was easy. It was there. She bought it. There was a bunch of people on Facebook talking about it and a bunch of social proof. Now she looks at it and goes, oh, that's a bit average. So if I talk about doing a bit more yoga because I'm getting a bit stiff and old, she's, oh, why don't you go and use that? Because that's quite easy. It's not really proper yoga, she'll say. But that's what got us started. And millions of people have bought Yoga Burn over the years. It's a super high volume business. It's been one of ClickBank's best sellers for, not the best seller, but it's been up there for a long time. That has got, people have bought it and not got to the end of that 30-day challenge. But equally, there are people like my wife who that was their kind of gateway drug into the rest of yoga and all the amazing stuff it's done for her. You can't expect absolutely everybody to shift from the thing they want, from the quick fix into the long-term thing. One thing's for sure, if they don't get that quick fix, they're not going to take the second step. So I think you have to put that pride away. And what makes it harder is that's what's in all the front end marketing. All the other stuff doesn't get seen by the general public because it's all in the back end. Now you fix this problem. This is what we do. That's the stuff that gets sold to the list of people who bought the very first product. So everybody out there thinks you're just about the drop a dress size program or you're just about the 30-day challenge. And they don't realize that there's some really good quality intensive stuff that goes on afterwards. And it makes it tough. And I think that most of the challenges around building successful information stroke transformative businesses are actually around overcoming those hurdles about putting yourself out there, connecting with people who are only just entering the market and being relatable to them rather than trying to impress your peers at a higher level. And I think if people can recognize that and swallow their professional pride and realize that professionalism is actually more about helping those people than it is about competing with your peers on credentials or whatever it is you're doing, it's a much better place to be. And you'll make a lot more transformations by doing that.
That's phenomenal. And I don't think, quite frankly, there's any way better that we could tie the episode off. So what I want to do is ask you really quickly, where can everyone else go to find you? You've shared so many great things and got a background that's afforded you a wealth of experience across all different kinds of industries. And quite frankly, I think it's given you a really beautiful and succinct and seasoned, essentially, view of the way that this stuff actually works on a psychological level. And so if someone were to want to go forth and find out more about what it is that you have to offer or where else they can learn from you or keep up with all the great content that I know that you're pushing out on a regular basis, where can they go to do that?
So if you just go to stephenpratley.com, that's a tiny landing page. It's got a few pointers off to the social channels where I'm most active, my agency, The Conversion Co, where we help optimize people's funnels, but also to a new site I've launched called Copy and Conversions, where there's a weekly newsletter that talks about why online buyers buy, so you can make more sales. And I'm building that up as an educational resource that anybody can get to on a self-service basis. There's a newsletter there. I'm also starting to build out a swipe file of more modern sales letters and VSLs that people can really shape a model what's working now as well. So that's only been going for a few weeks. That's going to be growing in time. So if you get yourself on the email newsletter there, you'll get some great stuff.
Awesome. Love to hear it. And that link's going to be down in the show notes, but that's stephenpratley.com. You can head and catch up with anything and everything Stephen's got coming out because there's some exciting stuff down the pipeline. But I want to take a quick second to thank you because this has been so much fun. Definitely one of the most eye-opening conversations that I think I've had in a long time around buying psychology and what that process looks like. And I think that everyone who's listening is going to get a hell of a lot out of it too. So thank you so much, Stephen.
That's awesome. It's been a blast. I've really enjoyed it, Jacob. Thanks so much for persisting on getting me on here. So.
Oh, 100%. Wouldn't quit it. And maybe we'll do it again soon. And thank you so much, everybody, for listening. This has been awesome. Stephen did a great job. You can check out his website down in the show notes there. And until next time.